It's in the aftermath of a deeply significant relationship ending that we come face to face with one of the most baffling truths about our own minds. We begin to realize something unsettling, that our consciousness is not a single unified entity, but rather a system composed of separate regions that interpret reality very differently. Specifically, we discover that our minds contain at least two dominant centers of awareness, the logical mind and the emotional mind. These two, though housed in the same brain, often fail to communicate effectively and seem to exist in parallel, each convinced of a different version of the truth. Let's begin with the logical mind. This part of us is swift, analytical, and relatively detached. It takes the facts as they come and tries to process them cleanly. In the context of a breakup, it rapidly gathers and catalogues all the evidence. It knows the relationship is over. It remembers clearly how the other person began to pull away. It recalls how messages went unanswered for days. It understands that calls were ignored, texts left on read, and plans constantly postponed or cancelled. It sees that the person may have already moved on, perhaps even found someone else. It pieces together the trail of disregard, disrespect, and emotional detachment. The logical mind, after all, has watched the deterioration with open eyes. It has seen the lies, the emotional withdrawal, the late-night social media activity that hinted at another presence. It knows, beyond reasonable doubt, that the person is gone. And yet, within the very same person, often at the exact same moment, another force is at play, the emotional mind. This part of us doesn't deal in facts or logic. It operates in memory, longing, and deep emotional imprints. Unlike the logical mind, the emotional mind doesn't accept abrupt endings. It resists. It rebels. It clings to fragments of what once was. While the logical mind writes closure, the emotional mind writes a sequel. While logic says, it's over, emotion replies, but remember when? This emotional mind doesn't deny the facts outright. It hears them. It even recites them. They ghosted me. They hurt me. They don't want me. But beneath the surface, it quietly slips away, sneaking back into old mental tapes and emotional photo albums. It replays the tender mornings, the shared jokes, the private names, the way they once reached across the bed to hold your hand in the dark. It floats back to a sunset walk, a shared meal, or a random Tuesday night when everything felt safe and warm. The emotional mind builds its argument not from logic, but from feeling. And feelings, unlike facts, do not obey linear timelines. This division between minds is not a small inconvenience. It's a profound, internal conflict. On the one hand, we hear ourselves saying, they weren't good for me. On the other, we feel tears well up while scrolling through an old message thread. One part of us wants to block them forever. The other imagines bumping into them on the street and getting one last hug. One side whispers, let it go, while the other silently screams, please come back. The logical mind tries to intervene. It reminds us how many times we were left waiting, how often promises were broken. It raises important questions. Would you ever trust someone who did that again? Would you feel secure with someone who made you question your worth? These arguments are sound. They are valid, and yet they fail to quiet the ache. The emotional mind doesn't want answers. It wants connection. It doesn't understand why someone would stop loving when love had once bloomed so brightly. This mind, our emotional brain, is deeply loyal, almost irrationally so. Once it has formed a bond, it expects that bond to be eternal. It doesn't factor in betrayal, complexity, or the passage of time. Like a loyal dog waiting at a door, it holds space for a return, even when all evidence points to an empty road. It behaves more like a child than an adult, naive, hopeful, aching. It believes in forever, and when forever is broken, it doesn't know what to do. This emotional allegiance is not a weakness. It's part of what makes us human. But in the context of heartbreak, it becomes a source of torment. The mind becomes a battlefield. Logic throwing evidence like spears. Emotion wrapping itself in memories like armor. The result is paralysis, confusion, and deep emotional fatigue. This duality can feel maddening. We wonder, why can't I move on? Why am I still crying when I know they treated me poorly? The answer lies in this internal division. Knowing something intellectually is not the same as accepting it emotionally. The two processes run on different schedules, use different tools, and heal at very different paces. This is not a matter of weakness or emotional immaturity. It's neuroscience, It's biology, it's history, it's trauma, it's love. The emotional mind isn't stupid, it just works differently. It doesn't process endings through information, it processes them through experience. That's why no amount of self-talk, no list of red flags, no well-meaning advice can instantly rewire it. And so, during the early stages of a breakup, we find ourselves trapped in this loop. One mind has accepted the reality, the other mind refuses to follow. We say we're okay, and in many ways, we are. But then we smell something they used to wear, or hear a song they once played. And suddenly, we're not okay at all. We live for a time in two worlds at once. The world where we know they're gone, and the world where we still feel them with us. It's a painful in-between, a space where healing hasn't caught up with knowledge. And in that space, we must learn the hardest of lessons, patience with ourselves. As days pass after a breakup, one might assume that time alone will ease the heartache. That distance will allow logic to take full control and soothe the emotional wounds. But those who've lived through heartbreak know the truth. Time doesn't heal, at least not on command. What actually unfolds is a period of deep inner resistance, where the emotional mind, though outnumbered and outreasoned, refuses to surrender. While the logical mind grows sharper with each reminder of betrayal, each reread of unanswered messages, the emotional mind grows more inventive, even rebellious. It begins crafting its own alternate reality, one not based on evidence, but on hope, memory, and emotional investment. In this universe, they're not truly gone, they're just confused. Not heartless, just scared. Not in love with someone else, just trying to find their way back. This is when the emotional mind turns from silent denial to active delusion. It begins building scenarios. What if I bumped into them at the cafe? What if I posted something that reminded them of us? Maybe if I changed my hairstyle, or sent a funny meme, or reached out just once more. It would all be different. These thoughts aren't logical, and we often know they're foolish even as we have them. But the emotional mind isn't concerned with appearing rational. It's concerned with resurrecting the bond. The emotional mind hates unfinished stories. It despises abrupt endings, and when there's no clean goodbye, no closure, no final conversation, only silence, it reacts with desperation. Like a child who's been left in a grocery store aisle, it spins in circles looking for someone who won't return, whispering, maybe they'll come back. And so, in the absence of resolution, it creates fantasy to fill the void. This rebellion doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it's subtle. We stare longer at our phones. We check their social media accounts under fake names. We write drafts of letters we never send. We imagine what we'd say if we saw them again. We convince ourselves that they miss us too. That maybe, just maybe, they're thinking the same thoughts at the same time. The emotional mind is remarkably creative when it comes to justifying longing. And when the logical mind steps into protest, reminding us of the cold facts, the blocked numbers, the emotional neglect, the emotional mind simply nods and pretends to agree. Yes, you're right, it says. But then it turns away and slips back into its memories. Back to that rainy afternoon when they held us close, to the way they laughed, to the time they shared a secret fear, to the promise they once made when the world felt like it belonged only to the two of us. Here lies the emotional paradox. We miss who they were, not who they became. The emotional mind doesn't love the person who ghosted us. It loves the one who once looked at us like we were everything. And it can't let go of that version, because letting go would mean acknowledging that it may have never been real at all. This resistance is especially powerful in those who loved deeply. The more sincerely we gave, the more desperately we hold on. Because if it wasn't real, if they didn't mean it, then what were we doing all that time? The emotional mind isn't just mourning a person, it's mourning a version of reality that it built itself around. The imagined future, the sense of home, the emotional identity. And sometimes the emotional mind goes further. It gets angry, not at the other person, but at the logical mind. It says, "Stop telling me to move on. Don't you see I'm hurting?" It wants to stay in the past, not because it loves pain, but because that's where love still lives. It feels abandoned not just by the ex, but by its own rational self. The same self that once encouraged this relationship, once said, "They're the one." Now, the emotional mind feels betrayed, left to grieve what logic has already buried. We don't talk enough about this inner war. Society tells us to get over it, to be strong, as though heartbreak was something linear, solvable with good advice and a gym membership. But no amount of logic can speed up an emotional process. The emotional mind heals slowly, on its own terms, not because it's weak, but because it once trusted deeply, and that trust has been broken. It doesn't want revenge, it wants understanding. And understanding takes time. Sometimes the emotional mind lashes out. It creates unhealthy desires, to chase, to beg, to seek revenge, to humiliate. Not because it truly wants those things, but because it's desperate for release. It doesn't know how to transform grief into peace, so it rages, sulks, fantasizes. It writes poetry and burns it. It plays songs on repeat. It sits alone in crowded rooms wondering how someone who felt so close could become so unreachable. But beneath all that noise is a simple, tragic truth. The emotional mind just wants to be loved again by the person who took that love away. It's important to recognize this part of ourselves, not with shame, but with compassion. We are not crazy for yearning, for dreaming, for imagining. We're human. We are wired to attach. And when that attachment is severed without preparation, our systems go into chaos. This chaos isn't a flaw. It's a function of being deeply alive. And so we carry on, torn between two minds. One telling us it's time to move on, the other waiting by the door. By now, the conflict between our logical and emotional minds is no longer subtle. It has become a full-scale psychological civil war, a long and bitter siege of one part of the self against another. Days and nights bleed together in a haze of emotional relapses and intellectual reprimands. You wake up knowing it's over. By noon, you're reminiscing over old texts. By nightfall, you're rehearsing conversations in your head, imagining how they might still come back. This is when the emotional mind becomes most volatile. No longer content with quiet pining, it becomes manipulative. It doesn't manipulate others, it manipulates us. It tells us to send a casual, "hope you're doing well" message. It whispers that, perhaps, an accidental Instagram story will make them curious. It encourages irrational fantasies. What if we show up at that concert they love? What if we make a grand, heartfelt gesture? And for a split second, we're convinced it'll work. The logical mind, meanwhile, is exhausted. It's done everything it can, compiled the evidence, laid out the facts, reminded us of all the red flags. It has tried silence, distraction, even new hobbies. But none of it seems to work. Like a teacher trying to reason with a heartbroken student, it's left raising its hands in defeat. How many times, it says, must I explain that this isn't love anymore? But the emotional mind doesn't care. It doesn't learn through facts. It learns through repetition, experience, and collapse. And until it burns itself out, the logic has little power. The emotional mind is like a child who's lost their parent in a crowd. It can hear the announcements, see the facts, feel the distance, but it still runs from aisle to aisle, calling out, hoping for the impossible. It's not that it refuses to accept reality, it's that it doesn't yet know how. And so it continues spinning, often dragging us into deeply self-destructive behaviors. We begin to bargain with ourselves. Maybe if I just explained things one last time. Maybe if they knew how much I still care. We type out long paragraphs, delete them, retype them. We stalk their social media, looking for signs, anything, that might mean they're thinking about us. Did they like a post that sounds sad? Did they unfollow a new person? Did they listen to that song we once shared? We become forensic analysts of the imaginary, and the logical mind screams, "Stop, this is madness." But by now, the emotional mind has built an entire narrative, a version of events where love is still possible, where they didn't really mean to hurt us, where reconciliation is just a message away. And in a cruel twist, every silence from them is interpreted not as closure, but as a sign they're processing, waiting, just scared. This narrative isn't rooted in reality. It's rooted in emotional survival. To the emotional mind, accepting that someone we loved could discard us, ignore us, move on without grief, that is too painful to comprehend. So instead, it builds illusions. Better to live in fantasy than to fully face the depth of rejection. This is when we enter what therapists call attachment echoing. We unconsciously recreate the emotional dynamics of our early relationships. If love in childhood was uncertain, conditional, or painful, then a chaotic, emotionally unavailable partner feels weirdly familiar. Their withdrawal triggers not just adult sadness, but infantile terror. The sense that our emotional survival depends on getting them back. And so we chase, not because we're weak, but because we're wired that way. Our emotional brain, steeped in childhood wounds, equates rejection with death. It's not about logic anymore. It's about the nervous system screaming for connection. Meanwhile, the logical mind watches this spiral with horror. It tries boundaries. It suggests therapy. It urges us to block them, to delete photos, to move forward. But each attempt is undone by late-night cravings, by dreams of their return, by moments of unbearable quiet. Eventually, the logical mind hits a wall. It realizes that unless something changes drastically, this war will destroy the whole system. The stress is unbearable. Work suffers. Sleep vanishes. Friends worry. The body begins to ache. We get sick more often. We cry at inopportune moments. We feel like shadows of who we used to be. This is when the logical mind stages an intervention. It may happen dramatically or subtly, but it comes. Sometimes it's a sudden trip, a getaway to another country, an impulsive change of scenery. Sometimes it's a therapy session where everything breaks. Sometimes it's just lying on the floor one evening, realizing we cannot live like this anymore. And in that moment, the logical mind doesn't argue. It compassionately takes over. It says we may never stop loving them, but we cannot continue like this. We are bleeding out. We are wasting our life chasing a ghost. And for the first time, the emotional mind pauses, not because it suddenly agrees, but because it's tired, exhausted really. It starts to listen, not fully, not forever, but enough. Enough to delete the messages, enough to block the number, enough to stop checking their feed, enough to open the blinds in the morning and breathe, enough to say, maybe there's more than this. This moment of cooperation between the two minds is fragile. It doesn't mean the pain ends, but it does mean that healing begins. And in that small, quiet space between a sigh and a breath, we feel the faint stirrings of peace. Eventually, something shifts. Not all at once, not with a dramatic revelation or a blinding epiphany. It's quieter than that, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the way dawn edges in before the sun ever rises. There is no announcement, just less pain. The war between the logical and emotional minds does not end with a winner. There is no glorious surrender, no treaty signed. What happens is more akin to a truce, an unspoken agreement between two deeply wounded parts of the self. The logical mind, bruised and weathered from trying to impose truth, lowers its weapons. It no longer tries to beat the emotional mind into submission. Instead, it offers something softer, understanding. You loved, it says, and love doesn't disappear just because someone did. The emotional mind, still tender, still longing, no longer fights so fiercely. It begins to trust that the world may still hold warmth elsewhere. It begins, however slowly, to imagine connection that doesn't involve clinging to someone who vanished. And thus, a fragile peace is born. This is when we notice that we haven't checked their page in 3 days, that we didn't dream about them last night, that the old song they used to sing doesn't sting quite so sharply. The waves of grief still come, but now they have breaks between them. We cry, but we also eat. We ache, but we also laugh. Life, real life, begins to seep back in. This shift doesn't mean we're healed. It means we're healing. It means our nervous system is finally beginning to stabilize. Our identity no longer entirely anchored in being the one who was left. We start remembering other parts of ourselves, the parts that existed before them. The passions we had before their name took over our playlists, our poems, our passwords, the friends we once called, the dreams we placed on hold, the versions of us that waited quietly behind the curtain, wondering if they would ever be invited back on stage. And for the first time in a long while, we begin to see ourselves not as broken, but as becoming. But this new self isn't the same as the one before the breakup. It's wiser now, scarred perhaps, but also stronger. We don't look at love the same way anymore. We've learned that passion without consistency isn't love. That longing doesn't mean belonging. That someone missing you doesn't mean they're meant for you. We've also learned that not everyone knows how to receive love, and that some people will run from it, not because we're unworthy, but because they are still haunted by ghosts of their own. This is perhaps the most painful lesson of all, that we were not wrong for loving them. In fact, we were brave. We were honest. We gave our hearts. And sometimes People leave not because we lack something, but because our love was too honest for the mask they were wearing. And so, slowly, we begin to love ourselves for the very things they couldn't handle. For our intensity, for our loyalty, for our softness, for our dreams of forever. The emotional mind doesn't disappear. It still remembers. Sometimes it still aches. But now, instead of hijacking the system, it makes space. When it mourns, it no longer drowns. It simply grieves, and then lets go, like a bird landing for a moment before taking flight again. And the logical mind, having learned compassion, no longer rushes in to silence or shame. It simply reminds us, this pain is a part of love, but it is not the whole of it. This is the new alliance, a coexistence of heart and head, of feeling and reason, of remembering and moving forward. And in this new space, we begin to explore again. We may download the dating app, not with desperation, but with curiosity. We may sit across from someone new, not comparing every word to the one who came before, but simply allowing the moment to exist. We may even find ourselves laughing, genuinely, not to cover pain, but because we are actually enjoying something. We may dance again. We may go home alone and feel whole. We may say no to people who remind us of old wounds. We may say yes to those who show up with steadiness. And we will carry the memory, not as a weapon, not as a warning, but as a reminder of our capacity to feel. Because here is the truth the emotional mind finally accepts, whispered by the logical mind in its gentlest voice. They are gone, but you are still here, and you are still lovable. In time, the emotional mind believes it, not just understands it, feels it. And that changes everything. We begin to realize that love wasn't what broke us. What broke us was the way it was withdrawn. But if love has the power to shatter, it also has the power to rebuild. And now we know what to look for. Not butterflies, but calm. Not chaos, but clarity. Not fantasy, but reality. We will love again. But this time, we will do it from wholeness, not hunger. And when we do, when the emotional mind finally finds someone who stays, someone who shows up, someone who holds us without conditions, it won't fight them. It won't sabotage. It won't scream, "This is too good to be true." Because it has learned, through all the pain and all the war, that safe love is possible. This is how healing happens, not by erasing the past, but by integrating it. By letting both minds hold hands and say, we did our best, we lost, we grieved, and now we begin again.